life exists on other dimensions. This, ties in with the whole concept of reincarnation. Where do we go when, in those periods between incarnations? In many ways, this is the whole situation we've got here on Earth is Lord of the Rings. You see, we're one humanity. This is another part of the awakening. There is fundamentally there. I mean, I might get in trouble here, but
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Watch Mojo's Unveiled podcast. I'm your host, Rob, and my guest today is Paul Nugent. He is an international director of the Aetherius Society, and he is also the author of the book Maya Mire, which chronicles the life and work of the late Dr. George King. And he joins me today to talk about the Aetherius Society's mysterious operations, including the use of alien technologies, interactions with otherworldly beings, and we'll discuss what this all means in the current state of UAP disclosure. Paul, welcome to the show.
thank you very much, Rob. It's a great pleasure to be with you and to discuss all the things you just named.
I'm looking forward to it. Your book, Maya Mire, is split into two parts. The first part addresses your introduction to the Aetherius Society. So why don't we start there? Can you take us to how you found out about them and what is it that drew you to the organization?
Sure. Well, just to give, I guess, some context, I was born in 1958, obviously, or presumably you can tell from in England, and had, I would say a very normal sort of childhood. I wasn't great at school, and I never, really knew what I wanted to do. And so when I did manage to make it to college, when I graduated, I actually began a career in the wine trade. And so I was working in London for a small independent company. And we were doing quite well. We actually became Britain's Wine Merchant of the Year a few years after I joined. But I always felt a sort of a deeper sense that something, was missing from my life. I mean, I was, I guess, mid-20s. I was embarking on this career, which was okay. I wasn't, passionate about it or anything. With my brother, we were able to get a mortgage on an apartment in London, which was, back in those days, things were affordable, not crazy. And, I had a girlfriend, but I just intuitively knew that there had to be, at least I wanted there to be more to life than just this all rather sort of superficial stuff. And it was a little bit of a crisis, I suppose. I didn't know what to do, but having been raised in the Anglican Church, I reached out for the Bible and I started reading the New Testament. And it had, I would say, a very, profound effect upon me, in the sense that I recognized, here is someone, namely obviously Jesus Christ, who does understand a far deeper meaning as to how really we should be living. So I became quite involved in a church in London, a well-known church, actually, St. Martin in the Fields in Trafalgar Square, which cared for homeless people. But meanwhile, my boss, who, apart from being a master of wine, was a wonderful mentor in a broader sense. He was studying Eastern philosophy at a school in London. And I began to attend that and was studying primarily the Bhagavad Gita. But I mean, the principal concepts, I suppose, are karma and reincarnation, which is certain not orthodox aspects of the New Testament. But it nonetheless, resonated with me as being something profoundly true. So I, began to study Eastern philosophy. And meanwhile, his secretary, a woman called Patricia, had been to a place in the north of Scotland. She joined us shortly after I joined. I became Nick's assistant, basically. And it was initially just the three of us running this company. And she'd been to a place in Scotland called Findhorn, where they communicated with nature spirits. This is back in the sort of 50s and 60s. And grew a phenomenal garden. It became world famous. People from all over the world wanted to go and see this incredible, this garden and learn, how to communicate literally with the devas or nature spirits. And she was also a member of a place in London called the Aetherius Society, which I'd never heard of, which had been founded in 1955, by a man called Dr. George King, who, following World War II, in which he was essentially a conscientious objector. He knew "thou shalt not kill" as a law greater than man, but he wanted to serve, and he served as a section leader in London's fire service, going through the Blitz, and witnessed the sort of madness and chaos and horror of war, with the bombing of civilians, killing people, period, basically. And that led him, coming out of that experience, to study and practice various yogic techniques. But he did so, very diligently, for up to 8 hours a day over a 10-year period. And the consequence of that extreme intensity, if you like, was that a force that we all have at the base of the spine called the Kundalini rose through a channel in the spine, called the Sushumna channel. These are all Sanskrit terms, opening the chakras or psychic centers, enabling him to go into the highest state of yoga, or high state of consciousness, known as samadhi, in which one has an experience of cosmic consciousness. One becomes realized, if you like. It's all absolute oneness. There is no division. It's also a state of ecstatic bliss. And he attained that. This was in the early 1950s. And it was also a time, well, in global terms, when we'd entered the Cold War. And we'd gone nuts beyond this World War II and beyond Hiroshima and Nagasaki, testing atom bombs, later hydrogen bombs. And it was also a time when the term flying saucer became coined. Actually, that was 1947, but people were seeing these craft. There were many flying saucer groups. Our understanding is because mankind had been in this same nuclear space before, and had destroyed both those previous civilizations, most recently Atlantis, before that Lemuria. Even going further back than that, a planet from which we came, all that remains of that planet is the asteroid belt. And anyway, through Patricia, I started to go along to the Aetherius Society. It just, there was an inherent sort of truthfulness, not only about the teachings, but about the people. There was a fundamental goodness, a spiritual goodness, if you like, a greater realization. I was not just sort of seeking truth for myself, but was seeking ways in which humanity could sort of come into a far greater awareness of who and what we're supposed to be doing here on this earth. And the Aetherius Society began to, well, certainly, answered many of those questions for me.
So, what was the principal goal of the Aetherius Society? You mentioned that humanity had gone through previous cycles of destruction and I suppose a sort of rebirth. Can you dive into more detail on those, and what exactly was the Aetherius Society trying to do about it?
I'd say fundamentally, the Aetherius Society which is, it's an international organization, it's a non-profit organization, charitable organization. Two things really. One aspect is to bring about, you could say, a complete reorientation of thought. I mean, we've got crises. I'd say that we have a global existential crisis on this earth. There's many problems that are facing us that are not going to be fixed by AI or AGI. Fundamentally, it's a spiritual problem that we have. We've lost the sense, a whole sense and purpose of who we are and what our role is. We're spiritual beings. We're here to evolve and to advance and to emerge more and more into this incredible cosmos that surrounds us. We've sort of so dumbed ourselves down into an incredibly limited thinking, whereby, if there is an other life out there, then it's certainly in our solar system, it's got to be, microbial at best. So the Aetherius Society, through the communications which came through George King when he was in this positive yogic samadhic trance, and there are over 600 of these cosmic transmissions. Well, number one, the elephant in the room is who's making these communications. Our understanding is it's higher or more evolved life streams than ourselves from within our own solar system, primarily, by no means exclusively. But life exists on other dimensions. This, ties in with the whole concept of reincarnation. Where do we go when, in those periods between incarnations? We go to other realms, astral realms, both higher and lower, depending on our whole karmic pattern. So, number one, it's this whole reorientation of thought, recognizing that life goes on beyond death and that life goes on beyond this earth. And our fundamental purpose for being here is to, you could say, is to spiritually evolve, to advance, to grow, to fulfill our inherent, and I would say, divine potential. So that's one aspect, the sort of whole cosmic teaching, the cosmic spirituality, the far greater realization, and a path to attain that. The other aspect is that is a recognition that humanity is in crisis, and if in cooperation, you mentioned this in your introduction, in cooperation with these more advanced intelligences, from within our own solar system, as I say, primarily, to infuse our world with a heightened level, if you like, of spiritual energy, to enhance the whole conditions. And in other words, well, yes, I mean, I guess the sort of tiptoe into the deeper end of this whole thing. But we understand that Jesus came. We believe that Jesus was an avatar who came from Venus. The master after whom we're named, Aetherius, we recognize as being an intelligence from Venus. Jesus, in this, I think in the book of Revelation, it says, "I'm from the bright and morning star," which is Venus. I mean, we need to sort of break this glass ceiling and recognize that life does go on beyond death. It's very fundamental. We're spiritual beings. That it's not so radical and outrageous and ridiculous to make that to say that Jesus, if you like, or any of these masters came from other worlds. They came here to teach. One of the things they came to teach. They also came to perform a karmic manipulation. And our understanding is that the primary role of Jesus when he was on earth was to perform a profound karmic manipulation, which has been sort of misinterpreted. Well, he did come to save humanity, but not just through belief in him and you will be saved. He did perform this great karmic manipulation. And masters from other worlds, he taketh away the sins of the world. That's quite right. That was the saying I was looking for. He taketh away the sins of the world. That's not quite right. He can't do that. We can't screw up, so to speak, and just have somebody else. Oh, well, don't worry about it. I'll take care of that. No, by the very law of karma, there's a reciprocation that needs to take place, so these cosmic masters are also greatly assisting humanity at what we would say is a pivotal time, not just in our own evolution, although it is, and particularly with the sort of coming of AGI, but as I said, it's more essentially a spiritual crisis, a spiritual transformation that we need. But it's also a critical time in the lifespan of the planet, of the Mother Earth, as a living cosmic intelligence in her own right.
So, with this in mind, what you said before about those other civilizations that faced destruction, you mentioned Atlantis, Lemuria, and the name of the planet is escaping me. Maldek, you mentioned that in your book as well. Where is our current society at in terms of our path and the tightrope that we're walking? You mentioned that we're in crisis. There are many ways in which we're in crisis, but how close are we to suffering a similar fate as those previous societies?
I'd say we're at a crossroads. You see, another chapter in my book is the chapter of free will. There's an allowance for free will. And many people ask, well, if UFOs exist, or if more advanced intelligence than ourselves exists, why doesn't it just show up and make itself plainly obvious? That would be to force our free will. I mean, yes, there were sightings, particularly back in the 50s, indeed throughout history. I mean, the Bible, you could say, is riddled. I mean, what was the Star of Bethlehem? Because it certainly wasn't a star. And people don't go up in clouds. So we've been sort of tapped on the shoulder, given clues. That's also, I think, happening particularly at this time with what is now called UAPs. And the increasing pressure, at least it's being, openly talked about in Congress, because highly credible people have had too much, have seen, these craft or had experiences that make them, knock on the doors of government and wherever else they can. Pay attention. We're not alone. There's more out there. And I think I'd throw into that mix crop circles. I think that, which actually I saw that there's been another one fairly recently. I'm sure there'll be several fairly recently. But I think these are clues for humanity to start paying attention. And I think in terms of where we are at now as a civilization, it's for us individually and collectively to awaken to our own inner promptings. You mentioned part one of my book, which I call The Things I Knew Before I Was Born. I think it's true for all of us. We've all got, if you like, a sense of conscience or promptings, dare I say, a soul. There's a soul there. There's a soul that is speaking to all of us, and I think hopefully is sort of speaking to us more loudly, so to speak, because of the crises that we have. We're creating not only a dysfunctional world, but a very unpleasant world. And I don't just mean Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, Russia. Even for people who are not caught up in all of that, it's not exactly a life of joy, which it could be, and it should be, and dare I say, will be, with a greater understanding and realization of this far bigger picture of what we're really about. So where humanity's at, but there are people who are unquestionably sort of awakening to this far greater reality in a spiritual sense. There are also those who are very close to that, and they've got no interest in looking at it and would only ridicule it. And dare I say, are quite happy to go down a military, extremist, fanatical, I would say very ignorant, or certainly very unconscious path as a solution. You see, we're one humanity. This is another part of the awakening. There is fundamentally there, I mean, I might get in trouble here, but whether you're Palestinian or Jew or whatever, you're fundamentally, first and foremost, you're a human being. You've chosen to be that, or you've been told, it's fine. I've got no problem with that. But fundamentally, we're human beings. We're a human family on this tiny, beautiful planet that we have totally disregarded, with the exception of the handful of individuals, primarily indigenous people, who understand the Earth as a living being, that we've taken utterly for granted. Polluted the air, polluted the sea, polluted the soil, whatever else, raped, forest, whatever it may be, just in a way that is utterly unsustainable. And so we're at that crossroads, which can only come from some kind of inner spiritual prompting. A sense that things aren't as they should be, and then that will lead one to search, to seek answers.
And just to close the loop on this idea of the previous incarnations of humanity that faced destruction, what was the reason for that to happen to them? Were they on a similar path to us?
Yes, I would say almost identical, the best as I can understand it. And I would say that artificial intelligence was a very big part of that. And I don't want to sort of get all, paranoid about artificial intelligence. I mean, there's nothing wrong at all with technology. I mean, technology has given us this conversation, quite incredible. And yeah, so there's many wonderful things about it, incredible things about it. But as far as I understand it, in Atlantis and before that, Lemuria, we became lackadaisical because everything was done for us. We became lazy, and we just lost an inherent sort of connection to the earth and to each other, because it was to some extent, if not a large extent, robotic. And but behind it, and I'd say this is, we've still got this. Not everybody on earth, by any stretch of the imagination, is a saint. And we've had very wicked people. And in coming back to sort of reincarnation and the astral realms, our lower astral realms have become very powerful. And there are, for want of another term or a better term, there are dark magicians. In many ways, this is the whole situation we've got here on Earth is Lord of the Rings, and there are beings, black magicians, dare I say, use the term, in those lower astral realms, very powerful, that to influence how we are and how things play out on this physical realm. There are also, if you like, in that sense, more evolved, or what we tend to regard historically as angelic realms, individuals who, in their way, or within the karmic law, are also seeking to help and influence us. And so that's the predicament that we currently find ourselves in. And in Atlantis and Lemuria, we allowed more powerful beings to manipulate the situation on this physical realm through war. In fact, it's written up in ancient Sanskrit texts, the Mahabharata and another text, where we have what was called the Brahma weapon, and Indra's dart, and out of that came atomic destruction. And here we are again in a nuclear-armed world with, in a very sort of politically unhealthy, state of affairs, and with extremists on all sides. And so, we potentially could just allow ourselves to become too distracted, too lackadaisical, too pleasure-seeking, while other forces in the background are bringing about a destruction.
Let's get into talking about George King a little bit. You mentioned over 600 transmissions that he conducted over his lifetime.
He walked through, right, by going to a positive yogic somatic trance. Right?
That's right. So out of those, what would you, in your estimation, what were the most notable or important ones that really stand out?
That's a very good question. I mean, they were all important. That more or less goes without saying. However, there was one, what we regard as the most important cosmic transmission, which took place on July the 8th, 1964, which was a great cosmic karmic manipulation with a tremendous infusion of energy being given to the Logos of the Mother Earth. This was not the first time she'd been given an infusion of energy, but it was the most significant. The point being, you see, in trying to describe the Aetherius Society, I often say it's like trying to describe a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, because it's very hard to sort of talk about one thing without it sort of correlating to various other cogs and parts. But Maldek, which we mentioned, was huge in this whole picture. To me, it's the myth of the Garden of Eden. It's the planet we destroyed over 18 million years ago. All that remains of Maldek is the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. There is increasing evidence why astronomers are going back to, they sort of decide and then choose otherwise, but go back to consider that maybe that was a planet. It's hard for them to sort of entirely wrap their heads around. Our understanding is it was, and I say there's very good and interesting evidence that's come out in that regard. But being an aspect of God, I mean, it all came out of the Big Bang, the singularity. What's even behind the Big Bang, or as the yogis say, the outbreathing and the inbreathing of God. For how long has this God been breathing? This is just one breath that we're going through. But Maldek, the destruction of Maldek was absolutely critical in this whole evolutionary journey that we're making. And the consequence of that, of the destruction of Maldek, was that we could not just be taken out of manifestation because everything is an aspect of the singularity. We're a part of it. And but we needed somewhere to reincarnate. And all the other planets were already too evolved for us. This Earth was approached, and the Earth was willing to slow her own evolutionary journey down because everything is evolving. This whole solar system, the galaxy is moving towards Laniakea, a supercluster of galaxies. It's all in this, if you like, divine dance. Maldek should never have happened. It's the whole big thing about free will, which we chose. We needed somewhere to continue this reincarnatory process. We came to this Earth. The Earth has withheld herself, and after Lemuria, there was something called the ionosphere, a ring that was erected around Earth that shut her off from natural cosmic frequencies to protect us, because after Lemuria, it was a bad karmic move. We'd involved ourselves. We kind of needed to be incubated, if you like. The ionosphere was intensified after Atlantis. The Earth, in a way, was suffocating. She withheld herself for a certain period of time. It's said that just as Jesus could only suffer for so long on the cross, so can this Earth only suffer for so long. And that's why, if you like, everything's going exponential. It's why this period in time is so critical. It's not primarily about us at all. It's more about the planet. And a steady infusion of the energies that she denied herself for the last 18 million years, which to us is a long period of time. In cosmic time, it's actually not very long at all. But the Earth was the logos of the Earth, was given this tremendous infusion of energy, the most significant of which, what we call the primary initiation of Earth, took place on July the 8th, 1964. Unquestionably, that is the most important, that's the shift behind everything. And that was what we regard as the most important transmission Dr. King took or received. And we honor July the 8th every year. It's the holiest day in our calendar. There are a number of other transmissions. In a way, all of them in one way or another tie into July the 8th. I mentioned the lower astral realms. There had to be a cleansing of the lower astral realms. And there are intelligences, 3 in particular, who took on Earth physical bodies, who between October 1967 and February 1969 projected into the lower astral realms. I did say it's all Lord of the Rings, but it projected into the lower astral realms to cleanse the worst aspects of the intelligences, albeit in the black arts, put down there, because that cannot be exist in the sort of new age or new world that is coming to this planet. So they were, and they were all recorded. It's called Operation Carmelite. There's a chapter about it in my book. That, it's exactly Operation, it is Lord of the Rings, Operation Carmelite. But for real, and I say for real, but one has to decide that, come to that realization for oneself. Just one other thing I would like to mention, or perhaps two. The reason I came into the Aetherius Society, or rather I'm still with the Aetherius Society, the primary reason, going back to those early days when I first began to attend, as I mentioned, I was a Christian, still am a Christian. And on 12 consecutive Sundays in 1958, George King had gone into this positive yogic samadhic trance. And we believe Jesus, the same Jesus who's not dead, who's not sitting at the right hand of God anywhere, but a Venusian intelligence, had communicated through him, not for the first time, but on these 12 consecutive Sundays in 1958, and gave a profound set of teachings. We refer to it really as a sort of cosmic extension to the Sermon on the Mount. I have a copy here. Call it the 12 blessings. And one of those blessings is played during every Sunday service that we have at our centers. And I would go along and I listened to these blessings, and there was a profundity about them. There was an honesty and a truth about them. There was a greatness about them. And at the same time, after 9 of the blessings, Jesus gives a prayer. We pray like that in the Aetherius to send the energy out. And this was all very new to me, but I felt these literal sort of shafts of white light flowing out of the palm, the psychic centers, the chakras in the palms of my hand, to the entity as described in the 12 blessings. And it just sort of made me, as I say, take all this far more seriously. So the 12 blessings are very, very important. A few years later, in 1961, another series of transmissions called the 9 Freedoms were given by an intelligence from Mars. And I mentioned this path towards enlightenment and beyond, giving our evolutionary journey, beginning with bravery, beginning with that sort of listening to one's conscience, through love, through service, towards enlightenment, cosmic consciousness, ascension, interplanetary existence. It gives this remarkable journey. So they're all important. The ones I've mentioned, particularly important for us at this stage of our, evolution.
Lots to unpack. So you mentioned several beings originating from various planets within our solar system. I'm curious as to how you reconcile this with modern science, which says that Earth is the only life-supporting planet in the solar system. Everything else is barren and, has no indication that life ever existed there. How do you address that?
Well, again, I think this comes back to, what I was saying about an intuitive sense, the things I knew before I was born. Science would not recognize life before I was born. It's unfortunately why, so many scientists consider themselves to be atheists. There is no life after death. But if one inherently understands, or at least accepts, that there is life after death, and perhaps even more especially recognizes the whole concept or even law of reincarnation, and there's increasing evidence for these things, it begs the question, well, where do we go? How come psychic mediums can commune with non-physical intelligence? So one has to sort of, at this stage, just intuitively recognize that there are other dimensions beyond just this physical realm, which, of course, science is unable to measure, and therefore do not exist. I mean, science is struggling with trying to understand consciousness, whereas intuitively one can recognize that there's consciousness in everything. In fact, you could say that there is only consciousness. It's all that there actually is. So, for the scientists who would sort of ridicule this, which that's what they do, it's because they are unable to, at least professionally, privately and personally, they probably, many of them probably do believe and agree, go along with these. I mean, they are human beings, nonetheless. They do have emotions, and they do have relatives and other people who die, and they have a love. Love. What's love? I mean, how can you measure love? You can't measure love other than it being a feeling. What's a feeling? So, unfortunately, we're still at that rather primitive stage of science that has not yet awakened itself or opened itself to a far greater and, dare I say, spiritual reality.
I'm curious to know more about these transmissions from Jesus Christ, and particularly how this affects people who are Christian. Hearing about this, is this in your mind something that enhances Christianity or challenges the beliefs that Christians have?
Both, both. Um, Again, as I say, I was going to church. I was Martin in the Fields. I helped out. I was a member of the Scrub Club, cleaned the church, and as I say, it was for the homeless. So it got pretty untidy at times. I inherently knew, if you like, that there was a profundity about these blessings that I couldn't ignore. There was a purity, and I think that it was, you see, it was um, my sort of openness. It was my vulnerability. It was my vulnerability um, to truth. I like to say, prayer is care. If you don't have care, prayer is a response because you care. You care. I cared about the world. I cared about life. It mattered to me because I can inherently sense there's something beautiful behind it. There's something great behind it. And so listening to those blessings, there was a truth, there was a profundity, there was a greatness. And in that sense, it enhanced my appreciation of Christ. Um, and it broadened my Christianity, and it only has. I mean, and I think that I think Christianity in so many ways is stuck, and yet it's sort of bumping into it backwards. It's knocking on the door of these far greater concepts. I would love for Christians to read this book, to listen to these transmissions, um, because there's a greatness, there's an openness. It takes us beyond this earth. Not in any, well, rather with a far greater sort of sense of love and awe about the incredible nature of God, the incredible nature of everything. The galaxy is a living being. The Earth is a living being. The Sun is a living being. There are there are lords of karma, lords of creation. It's an exponential journey that these teachings take one on. But if you are closed, if you're sort of, dare I say, radicalized or orthodox, if it ain't in the Bible, it ain't so. And being in opposition. This is such a tragedy. This is so, in my understanding of Christ, so much the opposite of Christ. So that's my answer. It's awakening on the one hand, but for those who are absolutely fixed and closed, then I wish I could help you, but it's for you. It's for us to realize these things for ourselves.
I'd like to know more about George King. Was there something about him that was inherently special, or is it just the fact that he studied yoga so intensely over such a long period of time that it opened him up to these communications? And I guess as a second part to this question, I'm just wondering, these beings that are reaching out, are they searching for openings to communicate with humanity and they just happened to see one in George King and went for it? Is that how it works?
Well, yes and no, I suppose. As you will know, I mean, I was a personal assistant to Dr. George King in the latter years of his life. I was actually with him at the time of his passing. So I knew him. When I say I knew him well, relatively speaking, I did. As I say, I lived under the same roof at the same for 3.5 years, albeit I only ever knew him over the age of 70. Um, George King, and again, just to hold up my own book, Maya Mire, it's all documented in here. Born in England 1919, 20 years later, along came the Second World War. I mentioned, he was a conscientious objector. He knew thou shalt not kill was a greater law. Went through that very, tragic experience of the Second World War and seeing it firsthand in the bombing of civilians in London. George King was an enigma. What we've I mentioned three adepts in particular going into the lower astral realms to perform the cleansing that we call Operation Carmelite, but was similar in so many ways, in certain ways anyway, to Lord of the Rings. George King was one of those adepts. George King came from another world. George King was not of this earth. In fact, at the time of his birth, he was born in a place called Wellington, Shropshire, January 23rd, 1919. His grandmother, who was very psychic, had been a psychic advisor to Prime Minister of England, Lord George, said to the mother, George King's mother, he is not of this earth. That was her instinctive reaction on being there when the baby was born in 1919. He was not of this earth. He never revealed that. He never revealed that, and a true avatar never would. Those of us who were around him knew it because through the transmissions, and some of them in particular, it was impossible for him to disguise. But it was certainly nothing that was publicly disclosed, and he never did. In fact, they go the other way. They try to cover it up, and they do cover it up. One of the things he said of the Master Jesus is he was a very great actor. Jesus was a great actor. He disguised, came across as just this guy who teached and healed and things like that. But he was behind that, he was performing a far greater karmic manipulation. So to that same extent, George King was a great actor. And yet, through the privilege of being a personal assistant, being up close to him, you knew you were in the presence of greatness. You knew, it was greatness, but you were humbled. One was humbled, just in a way, just by sort of, through his eyes. It all shone through his eyes. There was a beauty and a greatness there. There was a beauty and a greatness there that was concealed, that was covered up. And yet one also knew, as I say, I only knew him over 70. The last time he went into a positive yogic somatic trance, because it's incredibly difficult and dangerous, was in 1981. I didn't meet him until 4 or 5 years after, see him till 4 or 5 years after that, didn't meet him till about 8 years after that. He still took what we call mental communications, telepathic communications, which he would communicate into a handheld tape recorder and then be transcribed. But going into a positive yogic somatic trance is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And certainly for the kind of extended period of time which he did. In LA, at the headquarters of the Aetherius Society in Los Angeles, I'm now at the Eastern USA branch in Michigan, but I was there for 30 odd years. There's what we call the transmission room, where from probably about 1966 onwards, which was a soundproofed room, but with the highest quality microphones that the Aetherius Society could afford. I mentioned we're a non-profit organization. We're far from being a wealthy organization. there's a table and a chair and these microphones in this soundproof room where he would go into this positive yogic somatic trance, whereby the body is essentially paralyzed, to bring through these transmissions, which could last anything from roughly half an hour to beyond an hour. Anything beyond 45 minutes is critically dangerous. The only other thing that's in that room is a bed, because after coming out of trance, he would collapse. The body was stone cold because everything had been taken up to the higher chakras, and he would be given massage to get the blood flowing again, and to bring him back to, okay. So, these are sort of a few insights in. We're not dealing with anything hokey here. And that's the profundity of the Aetherius Society. I would say, obviously, but if anybody who does investigate it, it's profoundly real. It's profoundly important. It's profoundly relevant to the times in which we're existing. As I say, we're sort of just daydream or whatever, the word sleepwalking, into a whole new world of AGI. And virtually, there's a danger of sort of becoming zombie-like. And that's, it's very important to sort of get back in touch with this inherent, voice of conscience, and soul connection that we have. It's sacred, it's profound, it's extraordinary. We have the greatest computer that money could ever possibly buy. It's called the brain and the psychic centers and the heart. We've, the whole body facility. And yet we've dumbed all of that down to a potentially very dangerous level. And it's a big part of the reason why I wrote the book. To help, in inverted commas, awaken humanity, at least those who are searching, to this far greater, profound reality.
The title of the book is Maya Mire. What does that mean?
Maya, Maya, is a Sanskrit word which means illusion. Maya is as in quagmire. So it's the quagmire of illusion that we find ourselves in. I obviously just like the play on words. I mean, I think it describes our situation, but my publisher wanted me to change it, and I was unwilling to change it, and that's explained in the epilogue at the end of the book. But he said, well, then you're going to need a subtitle, and I was willing to have a subtitle. So the subtitle is a spiritual journey into cosmic truth and the dawning of a new world. And that's where we are. We're at the dawning of that's the Mother Earth. She's changing. Her whole vibrations are quickening. That's having a knock-on effect on everything and on everyone. And it's for us as individuals to become cognizant of that and to align ourselves with that, because there is, I mentioned Maldek. To me, there's two goalposts. Maldek is one, the destruction of that world, relatively recent in cosmic times, a long time ago in our understanding. The other one, I think I briefly mentioned it, is Laniakea. Laniakea is a lovely Hawaiian word, which means immense heaven. It's a supercluster of galaxies towards which this whole galaxy of the Milky Way, together with 100,000 other galaxies in our sector of the universe, are moving towards at phenomenal and accelerating speed in the great going back to God, if you like, in the great outbreathing and inbreathing of God, in this great divine cosmic dance that's taking place. We are a part of that. That's our heritage. Beyond this, beyond death, beyond this world, we're here to attain cosmic consciousness. I always like to say cosmic consciousness is the beginning. That's the beginning. We haven't even begun. We're still below the surface of the water, sort of stuck to reeds in murk, and stagnancy and stuff. We haven't even begun to taste the air, the cosmic air, if you like, and merge with this far greater reality that these intelligences from other worlds have never gone beneath the water, or they can go beneath the water, but not that stagnancy, not that ignorance. They've never had it. They see it in us. They're help like a parent, like a loving parent. They're there to help us awaken to this far greater cosmic reality. We're moving towards Laniakea at phenomenal speed. We're not aware of it, but that's the far greater reality. And so, yeah, I don't know what the question was, but that was my.
I don't remember either, to be honest, but that was a great answer nonetheless. I guess that's a good segue into the topic of disclosure, which is something that has been increasingly spoken about in recent years. I'm curious to know your thoughts on that. What does that mean? How does it align with the, I guess, mission of the Aetherius Society? Is it conducive to the things that you are trying to accomplish? Is it helping? Is it harmful?
Totally, because I've mentioned, the intelligences who spoke through Dr. George King were primarily from within our own solar system. I mean, our neighbor, next door neighbor, if you like, coming to knock on the door. Is everything all right in there? I mean, because there's shouting and screaming and chaos in our own home. But this galaxy, and there are, goodness, billions of galaxies, is teeming with life. And in that sense, Earth is a very curious place. Who are these beings, these intelligences, or so-called intelligences, small I, who've destroyed themselves with Maldek, Lemuria, Atlantis, threatening to do it again, causing chaos in their old world, complete dysfunction. It's fascinating to observe, on the one hand. And again, as I was saying earlier, if they were to just be in our face, so to speak, it would force our free will. And I don't think that they're allowed to do that. I mean, we're seeing, you were having this conversation at a time of riots in the city of Los Angeles. I spent 30 years in LA. We've had riots before. My presumption is that if we had flying saucers hovering over the city, I think we would have lawlessness, because I think that people would sort of realize, well, the governments aren't in charge, the system's not in charge, and it would be justification to go out and cause chaos and looting and violence. And I suspect that may very well be the outcome if they were to be so adamant about their presence. So I think it's being incredibly subtle. It's very subtle. It's giving us glimpses. It's making us sort of question it. What is this, all this business about UAPs? Fairly recently, drones over New Jersey. I'm sure they still have drones over New Jersey. And I think that it's just this very sort of subtle approach. I mentioned crop circles, very much this, unfortunately, crop circles like UFOs used to be and UAPs are now, was basically either ignored or ridiculed or dismissed in one way or another. But I think it's only going to confront us more and more, and in tandem, hopefully, because the UFO movement never used to be spiritual. It's a new term is something called psionics, if you've come across the term.
Yes, I have.
Or you have, yeah, whereby there is this sort of more psychic, metaphysical, spiritual sense. In fact, at a conference earlier this year, they regarded that sort of almost spiritual aspect of the phenomenon as the most important aspect. And I would totally agree with that. It is, because it awakens us up to a far greater reality. This is profound. This is fundamental on every aspect of our being. I describe it in the introduction to my book as the biggest change in our evolution, as the time when we crawled out of the water as amphibious beings, into the discovery of land and sky. We're coming into something as vast, really, on scale of comprehension as that. It's utterly, and it's very delicate. It's very, because it could, spend us into a very quick downward tailspin spiral of atomic war. So it's very delicate. And they have to be delicate. and they have to be subtle about it. And meanwhile, as I mentioned in the Aetherius, we've got this infusion or this this infusion of sort of, for want of another term, spiritual energy. You could call it a love energy, frequency, that's helping. That's helping in this whole awakening process, because it is, they're bringing a species, if you like, out of a coma, the Maya Mire bit. They're bringing us, helping to bring us out of it, and there's a very slow awakening that's going on. And I would say for sure, UAPs are a part of that. But it's not just, oh yeah, there's life out there as well. It is for us to affect us in a very deep, profound, soulful, spiritual way.
If Dr. King were alive today, how do you think he would interpret the way that society has evolved with regard to, this disclosure movement and also AI and AGI?
I think,
What would he say?
unfortunately, he would shrug his shoulders, roll his head back, and laugh initially before he got very serious. Saw that fairly recently. One of the things, I think he said this back in about 1974. If human beings ever allow robots to take over, you're in serious trouble, because this has happened on other worlds. I mentioned, we talked about it briefly with Atlantis and Lemurria. He in that sense, he would be very concerned. You see, again, it's all about love, and it's all about the invocation of spiritual. It's about realization and the invocation of spiritual energy, and love, or an aspect of that I mentioned is prayer. We do a lot with prayer. Prayer is a way, as is mantra, of invoking a higher frequency of energy and sending it out. That's what. So he would just encourage. He would want more and more people to wake themselves up. Wake themselves up. Come on, it is real. Life is utterly profound. And we were told actually that one of the translations that we could destroy ourselves again. The only point that was made is that we would not be allowed to destroy the planet as we've done with Malden. And I would read into that. Well, the solar system, it's making its own spiritual journey. Karma can only be withheld for so long. And this solar system cannot afford to lose another planet. There are far bigger reasons. And if we do, we're still divine aspects of that singularity. We're still divine being. We would just greatly limit ourselves. We would throw ourselves back another 18 plus million years to go through this slow process of reincarnation, etc. Karma is exact. Yes, karma is compassionate, but karma is also exact. And so he would be unsurprised by the lackadaisical world that we're creating, and the sort of, as I say, sleepwalking into a world of AGI. Not that it's a question of how that plays itself out. But if we allow us to surrender ourselves to robots or whatever, we don't know the outcome. I know there are, people, very knowledgeable about all of that, who are extremely concerned.
Dr. King passed away, I believe, in 1997. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So almost 30 years ago.
Mhm.
How has the Aetherius Society carried on without him, and has it changed in any way?
Yeah, I think that I was thinking about this just the other day. I think it's a testimony to the Aetherius Society and George King and these teachings that 30 years on, the Aetherius Society is not only still functioning, but is growing and expanding. We're not a big organization. I said we're worldwide. We are, but we're, I think, pretty much well, certainly primarily in the English-speaking countries. Unfortunately, the transmissions were given in English, and they haven't, for the most part, have not been translated into other languages. But the fact that we are still going, the fact that we are still writing books, the fact that we're still passionate, the fact that not only those cosmic missions that I somewhat briefly alluded to in cooperation with beings from other worlds are continuing, but are fully continuing, in certain ways have been even expanded, is a demonstration of how well the Aetherius Society is doing it, in this day and age. But we are still small, because when to have someone claiming that Jesus is from Venus and that life exists on other dimensions, even that UFOs are real. I mean, that was laughed at until fairly recently, or just utterly dismissed. It's slow for humanity to change and wrap our heads around these things. But it's for those of us like myself, it's profound, it's life-changing, and it's extremely important. And that's why I'm talking to you. And I thank you for having the conversation.
Well, it's my pleasure. I wanted to ask this earlier, but it just came back to me. When talking about technology, my memory was jogged by the talk about AI and other even UAP technologies that we're kind of grappling with understanding. Your book mentions several instances where entities passed on their technology to us to like conduct missions and things like that. Can you talk about that a little bit? I'm assuming it's not, physical machines that were given, but rather more energetic or frequency-based stuff. Can you talk about that?
You see, I mentioned George King was from another world, within our own solar system, but he came, as did the other avatars. And most of that was locked up, but he nonetheless, could sort of so control the mind and be able to visualize physical radionic apparatus, which he was even able to sort of build or make functional on a mental realm. And then with extreme frustration, and he would try and explain, or would explain to some of the close staff who he had working with him. This is back in the 60s now, to build this radionic apparatus. And there's various aspects to it. There's various missions that we perform. But one of those particular pieces of apparatus, we refer to it as being a spiritual energy radiator, that has various components through which we call these beings, we call them cosmic masters. They're masters, but they're not terrestrial masters. They're extraterrestrial masters. We call them cosmic masters, through which these cosmic masters are able to direct energy. Now, they are also naturally infusing our world at various times in the year with a heightened frequency of energy, but it's far more karmically potent when we as terrestrials are physically and actively engaged with physical apparatus, that they can pass through that. Another very important component is what we call a radionic battery, which is a box primarily filled with very finely ground crystal, because crystal can hold energy. And we use these batteries in various missions that we perform, including one called Prayer Power that we perform every week in various locations around the world, where we invoke energy through mantra and prayer, store it in this crystal battery. And then at various times throughout the year, or if there are any crises, we've got pre-collected energy that we can release through these spiritual energy radiators to those situations. We're doing it after 50 years because we've seen, for want of another term, miracles. Whether it's to bring about a peace in a situation, you can't fix every situation, or sending it to nature spirits, the devas, where there are fires, where there are storms, or to bring help relief after an earthquake or a hurricane or something like that. So prayer is incredibly powerful. And there are these batteries that can hold that energy. We also have energy that we release to the logos of Earth. Like we have psychic centers, the planet has psychic centers through which energy flows. So we do have physical apparatus, yes.
What is humanity's role in the grand scheme of things, in this cosmic community that we're now discovering that we're a part of? What role does humanity play in it?
We're here to evolve, as is everything. The planet is evolving, the butterflies are evolving, the blades of grass are evolving, and we're evolving. And it's on this, I would say, unknowable journey described in the 12 blessings that only gets more and more ecstatic and incredible on higher and higher levels of consciousness. Ultimately, in this whole process of going back to God. I mean, the yogis describe it as for the manifestation to know that its creator. We're here to know God, only that God is really sort of unknowable. The 11th, to be very brief, but it's important, the 11th blessing is a blessing to the supreme lords of creation that have brought all manifestation into all of creation into manifestation, including the original potential. And it says in one of the lines in the 11th verse, these are the gods of the gods. These are the gods of the galaxies. These are the gods of the suns. These are the gods of the gods. And in the 12th blessing, which is a blessing to the absolute itself, God, if you like, not even the supreme lords of all creation can do justice to the picturization of the magnificence of God. So it's for us to evolve to greater and greater levels of ecstatic conscious realization of what we are a part of in this oneness of everything.
Paul, I think that's a great way to wrap it up. This has been a fascinating conversation. I very much enjoyed reading your book. I encourage everybody to check it out. And where can people go to learn more about your work?
Well, they can obviously go to the Aetherius Society's website, which is aetherius.org. And I hope you'll be able to put that in as a link.
Absolutely.
And I would love people to, pick up a copy of Maya Mire, which can be done either via our website, the Aetherius Society website, or obviously on Amazon. And I'd be again delighted if you could put a link, on your podcast.
With pleasure. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time and for your insight. And
thank you, Rob.
I wish you all the best. And thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll see you next time.